I'm Dr. Ray Middleton. I help people by delivering great training. Here's an example episode from one of my training courses explaining the Power Threat Meaning Framework. I'm a member of the Power Threat Meaning Framework Committee, and these materials were developed in conjunction with the committee. Next, I will explore and explain the next question in the Power Threat Meaning Framework, which is, what did you have to do to survive? This is asking, what kind of threat response are you using? What is a threat response? When faced with a powerful threat, we all respond to try to survive the threat, or at least limit the harm that it's causing us. We may respond in a variety of different ways, depending on the type of threat, our context, the resources available to meet our needs, our history of surviving this kind of threat might influence what our threat response is, our understanding of the situation, and the kinds of people in our lives right now. Our reactions to powerful threats can be helpfully called threat responses. Threat responses are ways that we try to protect ourselves. The basic idea is that human beings want to survive and get our needs met. So responding to threats in ways that maximize our chances of surviving the threat makes sense, doesn't it? It's understandable. Not all threats are equal, though. There is varying degrees of difficulty and surviving them depending on what strategies and power resources are available to us. Some threats are easy and some threats are very difficult to navigate, to survive, or to overcome. Our local social context can make it easier or harder to respond well to trauma or threats, such as high levels of poverty, violence, or racism might be contributing factors locally, making it harder to cope, as well as being traumatic in themselves. Often people cope well with, process, and make sense of trauma and threats, and it has no ongoing negative effect in their life, a natural healing response to threats. And this is called resolved trauma. But sometimes the trauma has ongoing negative impacts on someone's life, and this is called unresolved trauma. Unresolved trauma can be passed down generations, where the effect is passed on to children and grandchildren of survivors of trauma. This is called transgenerational trauma. There can be local threats and more global threats, such as the coronavirus pandemic or the threats from climate change. This is sometimes called climate trauma, eco-fear, or eco-trauma. So there are threats locally and more global threats, some close by, and some threats seem further away, depending on our journey through life, our situation. Everybody will be different. A key aim of the framework is to restore and put back the connections between naming specific threats and making a connection to specific kinds of threat responses, connecting the threat and the threat response. That makes sense, doesn't it? We're trying to restore these connections. This makes it meaningful and understandable, which can be part of the process of getting better and overcoming trauma and threats. This can include making connections between unfair and unjust practices or actions on a personal level, on a family level, on a local community level, and on wider social level between different groups in society or different nations. For example, between the war from Russia to Ukraine at the moment is a threat from one country to another. So you see there's different levels of threat. Instead of seeing some distress, unusual experiences, troubled or troubling behaviour as symptoms of mental illness or disorder within a medical science illness diagnostic narrative, this framework, the Power Threat Meaning Framework, views such unusual experiences or distress as understandable threat responses connected to powerful threats that have happened to and affected us. It can be hard to see these connections, as the threats may have been numerous and our responses varied. And one threat response may have been to try to forget about it and bury it below our level of consciousness. And forgetting may be an effective strategy, that's okay, which may work fine for us, unless the trauma and our reactions to it are having an ongoing negative effect on our life right now. Then we might need to look at that and deal with it. I hope you found that helpful. For more information about the live and recorded training I offer, just email me at ray.middleton@ladderforlife.com and sign up for my free trauma reform course by clicking the link in the description comments. Subscribe for more helpful videos and post a question in the comments and I'll reply.